Module 66 is about very common anxiety disorders. We'll also talk about OCD today and post-traumatic stress disorder. So anxiety is part of life. Speaking in front of a class, peering down from a ladder, waiting to play in a big game, any one of us might feel anxious. Even really seasoned performers like Green Day's Billie Joe Armstrong, who maybe that's too old school for you guys, whose anxiety and substance abuse resulted in canceled concerts in 2012 and 2013, suffers from anxiety disorders. So at times we might feel enough anxiety to actually avoid making eye contact or talking with someone. Fortunately for most of us, our uneasiness is not intense and persistent. It doesn't keep us from going about our day-to-day lives. But for some of us are more prone to notice and remember threats. This tendency might place us at risk for one of the anxiety disorders that are marked by distressing, persistent anxiety or dysfunctional anxiety-reducing behaviors. We're going to consider these three. General anxiety disorder, in which a person is unexplainably and continually tense and uneasy. It just doesn't go away. It's kind of a constant state of your nervous system being in that aroused mode. Panic disorder, in which a person feels sudden episodes of really intense dread, often with like physical symptoms to accompany, and then anxiety over the next time that it happens. And then phobias, in which a person is intensely and oftentimes irrationally, oopsie, just hit the same thing twice, sorry about that. Phobias in which people are intensely and oftentimes irrationally afraid of something very specific usually, or a specific situation. Two other disorders that involve anxiety, though the DSM now classifies them separately, are obsessive compulsive disorder, in which a person is troubled by really repetitive thoughts or actions, and PTSD, which we'll get to in just a little bit. So generalized anxiety disorder. Okay, for the past 2 years, Tom, a 27-year-old electrician, has been bothered by dizziness, sweating palms, heart palpitations, ringing in his ears. He feels edgy, sometimes finds himself shaking. With reasonable success, he hides his symptoms from his family and coworkers, but he allows himself few other social contacts, and occasionally he has to leave work. His family doctor and a neurologist can find no physical problem. Tom's unfocused, out-of-control, agitated feelings suggest a generalized anxiety disorder, which is marked by pathological worry. The symptoms of the disorder are pretty commonplace. Their persistence, for 6 months or more, is not. People with this condition, usually 2/3 of which are women, worry continually, and they are often jittery, agitated. They are oftentimes sleep-deprived. Concentration can be difficult as attention switches from one worry to another worry, and their tension and apprehension may leak out through furrowed brows, twitching eyelids, trembling, perspiration, or fidgeting. One of generalized anxiety disorder's worst characteristics is that the person may not be able to identify and therefore deal with or avoid its cause. To Sigmund Freud's term, the anxiety is free-floating. Generalized anxiety disorder is often accompanied by a depressed mood, but even without depression, it tends to be pretty disabling. Moreover, it can lead to other physical problems, such as high blood pressure. So many people with general anxiety disorder were maltreated or inhibited as children. As time passes, however, and emotions tend to mellow, general anxiety disorder kind of seeds into the background. Panic disorder, your textbook kind of describes it like an anxiety tornado. So panic disorder is marked by panic striking suddenly. It wreaks havoc and then it disappears. For about one person in 75 with this disorder, anxiety suddenly escalates into a terrifying panic attack. A minutes-long episode of intense fear that something horrible is about to happen. Your heart palpitates, there's shortness of breath. Sometimes you have like choking sensations, you tremble, and sometimes dizziness accompanies the panic, which might be perceived as a heart attack or other serious physical ailment. Smokers have double the risk of panic disorders because nicotine is a stimulant. Lighting up doesn't lighten you up. One woman suddenly recalled feeling hot as though I couldn't breathe. My heart was racing, and I started to sweat and tremble, and I was sure that I was going to faint. My fingers started to feel numb and tingly. Things seemed unreal. It was so bad I wondered if I were dying and asked my husband to take me to the emergency room. By the time we got there, about 10 minutes later, the worst of the attack was over, and I just felt kind of wiped out. That's what a panic attack feels like. So phobias are anxiety disorders in which a really irrational fear causes the person to avoid an object, an activity, or sometimes a situation. Many people accept their phobias and live with them, but others are really incapacitated by their efforts to avoid the feared situation. You guys can probably think of somebody, or maybe you have an irrational fear of something in particular. Some of the really common ones are heights, social anxiety, phobias about being around a lot of people, spiders, snakes, heights, flying. There are all sorts of pretty common phobias. Specific phobias may focus on animals, insects, heights, blood, enclosed spaces. People avoid the stimulus that arouses their fear. They hide during thunderstorms or avoid high places altogether, for example. Not all phobias have specific triggers. Their social anxiety disorders, formerly called social phobias, is shyness taken to the extreme. Those with social anxiety disorder have an intense fear of being scrutinized by others. They avoid potentially embarrassing social situations. They don't speak up. They don't eat out. They don't go to parties, or they will sweat and tremble when they do so. Much as fretting over insomnia may, ironically, cause insomnia, so worries about anxiety create panic attacks and create anxiety-caused sweating in public and all sorts of things. So they can kind of feed each other. If the fear is, people who have experienced several panic attacks may come to avoid situations where the panic has struck before. And if the fear is intense enough, it may become agoraphobia, the fear or avoidance of situations in which escape might be difficult or help unavailable when panic strikes. Given such fears, people avoid being outside of the home, in a crowd, on a bus, in an elevator. And here are some common specific phobias. As with generalized anxiety and phobias, we can see aspects of obsessive compulsive disorder in our everyday behavior. Everybody at times becomes obsessed with like senseless or offensive thoughts that will just not go away. Sometimes we just engage in compulsive behaviors like lining up books or pencils or cleaning something specific, having something that needs to happen in a very particular way. Obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors cross the line between normality and disorder when they persistently interfere with everyday living and cause distress. Checking to see if you lock the door is normal. Checking it 10 times is not. Washing your hands is normal. Washing so often that your skin becomes raw is not. At some point during their lives, often during their late teens or 20s, about 2 to 3% of people cross that line from normal preoccupation and fussiness to debilitating disorder. Although the person knows the things to be irrational, the anxiety-fueled obsessive thoughts become so haunting and compulsive that rituals that can be very time-consuming become kind of impossible to avoid. OCD is more common among teens and young adults than older people. A 40-year follow-up study of 144 Swedish people diagnosed with the disorder found that for most, the obsessions and compulsions had gradually lessened, though only 1 in 5 had completely recovered. Here's some pretty common OCD kind of repetitive thoughts and repetitive behaviors. Maybe you can see yourself in one or some of them. PTSD is our last topic for today. So our memories exist in part to protect us in the future. So there's biological wisdom in not being able to forget our most emotional or traumatic experiences, our greatest embarrassments, our worst accidents, our most horrid experiences, but sometimes, for some of us, the unforgettable memory kind of takes over our lives. For example, the complaints of battle-scarred veterans. Sometimes they experience like really haunting memories, nightmares, social withdrawal, jumpy anxiety, insomnia. These are really typical of what was once called shell shock or battle fatigue and is now called post-traumatic stress disorder. What defines PTSD is less the event itself than the severity and persistence of the traumatic memory. Nearly 250,000 Iraqi and Afghanistan war veterans have been diagnosed with PTSD, or traumatic brain injury, TBI. Many vets participate in intensive recovery programs using deep breathing, massage, group and individual discussion techniques to try to treat their PTSD or TBI today. PTSD symptoms have also been reported by survivors of accidents, disasters, violent and sexual assaults. A month after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, a survey of Manhattan residents indicated that about 8.5% were suffering from PTSD, most as a result of the attack. Among those living near the World Trade Center, 20% reported such telltale signs as nightmares, severe anxiety, fear of public places. To pin down the frequency of this disorder, the U.S. Center for Disease Control compared 7,000 Vietnam veterans with 7,000 non-combat veterans who served during the same years, and on average, according to the reanalysis, about 19% of all Vietnam veterans reported PTSD symptoms. The rate varied from 10% amongst those who had never seen combat to 32% amongst those who had experienced heavy combat. Similar variations in rates have been found amongst more recent combat veterans as well. The toll seems at least as high for veterans of the Iraq War, where 1 in 6 U.S. combat infantry personnel have reported symptoms of PTSD, depression, severe anxiety in the months after returning home. Researchers have also noted the impressive survivor resiliency of those who do not develop PTSD. About half of adults experience at least one traumatic event in their lifetime, but only about 1 in 10 women and 1 in 20 men actually develop PTSD. More than 9 in 10 New Yorkers, although stunned and grief-stricken by 9/11, didn't respond pathologically. Psychologist Peter Sudfeld, who was a boy who survived the Holocaust under deprived conditions while his mother died in Auschwitz, has documented the resilience of Holocaust survivors. It is not always true that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but it's often true, he reports, that what doesn't kill you may reveal to you just how strong you really are. Some data for you for PTSD occurrence. Feel free to pause. And the sort of symptoms that PTSD exhibits in people. Two learning processes that contribute to disorders. One is stimulus generalization. For example, when a person is attacked by a fierce dog and later develops a fear of all dogs, that's stimulus generalization. The second learning process is reinforcement. Helps maintain our phobias and compulsions after they arise. Avoiding or escaping the feared situation reduces anxiety, therefore we continue to do that. Immersion therapy is simply one treatment. It's a gradual introduction to the thing that's creating your anxiety or creating your phobia or fear. and helping you realize that it won't kill you to be exposed to it.